Captain Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck of Luna Base, watching Earth turn slowly below him when the sky above his home planet suddenly filled with ships. Not human ships, but something else entirely. The vessels were massive and dark, with strange angles that hurt to look at, and they moved in perfect formation like a deadly dance across the stars. Jake counted 12 of the largest ships he had ever seen, and dozens of smaller craft surrounding them like protective wolves around their pack leaders. Dr. Lisa Carter was in her laboratory at the United Nations building in New York when every screen in the facility went blank at exactly the same moment. She looked up from her microscope where she had been studying samples from the Mars expedition when the emergency alarms began screaming throughout the building. Her assistant rushed into the room with wide eyes and pointed toward the window. Lisa walked over and looked up to see massive shadows blocking out the morning sun. The alien ships hung motionless above every major city on Earth. London saw them first as dawn broke over the Thames, then Paris and Berlin and Moscow as the planet rotated beneath the silent fleet. The ships were beautiful in a terrifying way, with surfaces that seemed to shift between metal and something organic. They cast shadows so deep that streetlights came on automatically in the middle of the day. President Henry Walsh was pulled from a budget meeting and rushed to the Situation Room deep beneath the White House. Military advisors surrounded him, speaking rapidly about radar contacts and unknown aircraft, but Henry could see through the reinforced windows that these were not aircraft at all. They were something humanity had dreamed about and feared in equal measure for generations. On Luna Base, Jake Morrison tried to contact Earth but found only static on every channel. The communication satellites that had connected the lunar facility to home for over 20 years were simply gone. Not destroyed, but somehow switched off like someone had flipped a master power switch for the entire planet. Jake gathered his small crew of 15 people, and they watched the alien fleet through telescopes that had been meant for studying distant stars. The largest of the alien ships positioned itself directly above the United Nations building where Lisa Carter and thousands of other people had gathered in the main assembly hall. A beam of soft blue light descended from the ship and touched the roof of the building. The light passed through concrete and steel, as if they were made of glass, and formed a column in the center of the assembly hall. Ambassador Zethkar materialized within the light. He was tall and thin with gray skin that seemed to absorb light, rather than reflect it. His eyes were large and black and completely without expression. He wore robes that moved like liquid metal, and when he spoke, his voice came from everywhere at once rather than from his mouth. The message was simple and clear. Humanity would submit to the authority of the Galactic Council immediately and without question. Earth would be classified as a restricted world with limited technology and no expansion beyond their single solar system. Humans would provide tribute in the form of resources and scientific knowledge. Any resistance would result in the complete destruction of their civilization. Zethkar explained that the Council had brought peace to 847 worlds using this same process. Some species had resisted at first, but all had eventually seen the wisdom of accepting their place in the galactic order. The Council did not wish to destroy humanity, but they would if necessary. To demonstrate their power, the aliens sent out a single pulse of energy from their ships. Every satellite around Earth went dark simultaneously. Communication networks collapsed instantly. The internet disappeared. Cell phones became useless pieces of plastic and metal. GPS systems failed, and airplanes had to make emergency landings, using only their instruments. The world went quiet in a way it had not been for over 50 years. President Walsh stood before the assembly of world leaders who had gathered in the United Nations building and looked up at the alien ambassador. The creature waited with infinite patience for an answer that everyone assumed would be immediate surrender. After all, what choice did humanity have against technology so advanced it seemed like magic? But Henry Walsh had grown up reading stories about humans who refused to surrender, even when defeat seemed certain. He had studied history and knew that his species had a stubborn streak that often surprised their enemies. He looked around the room at faces filled with fear, but also something else, something that looked almost like anger beginning to grow behind the terror. Jake Morrison watched from Luna Base as the alien ships continued their demonstration. But instead of panic, he felt something cold and hard settling in his chest. His grandfather had fought in 3 wars and had taught him that bullies always made the same mistake. They thought fear would make people weak when it often made them dangerous instead. The Council had offered humanity a choice between submission and destruction, but they had not considered a third option. They had not considered that sometimes, when faced with impossible odds, humans chose to fight anyway, not because they thought they could win, but because surrender was simply not in their nature. Zethkar waited for Earth's answer with the confidence of someone who had never been refused. President Henry Walsh stepped forward in the United Nations Assembly Hall and looked directly at Ambassador Zethkar. The alien creature towered above him in its column of blue light, but Henry had faced hostile crowds and angry opponents his entire political career. Fear was nothing new to him, and bullies came in all shapes and sizes, including apparently alien ones. Henry spoke clearly so that everyone in the room could hear him, including the cameras that were somehow still broadcasting, despite the satellite blackout. His words would be remembered for generations. Earth would never bow to alien tyranny. Humanity had spent thousands of years fighting for freedom, and they would not give it up now simply because their enemies came from the stars instead of across an ocean. Zethkar showed no emotion at this response, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The alien ambassador had expected immediate submission, as had happened with every other species the Council had encountered. This defiance was unprecedented in his long experience. Colonel Amy Brooks was 200 feet underground in a facility that officially did not exist when the alien ships appeared. She had been expecting this day for 15 years ever since. The first crashed alien probe had been recovered from the Sahara Desert. Her team had been reverse engineering alien technology in secret, preparing for the moment when humanity would need every advantage they could get. Amy gathered her core team, including engineer Tony Martinez and pilot Kate Williams in the main laboratory. Around them were prototypes of spacecraft built from a combination of human innovation and alien technology. The ships looked crude compared to the sleek vessels hanging over Earth, but they incorporated principles that humanity had learned from, studying their visitors' crashed equipment. The facility had been built to survive nuclear war and was completely isolated from any external communication network. The alien pulse that had knocked out Earth's satellites could not reach the underground base. Amy activated the emergency protocols that would connect her facility with similar installations around the world through hardened cable networks that had been buried decades earlier. Jake Morrison received a coded transmission at Luna Base through old emergency channels that most people had forgotten existed. The message was brief but clear. Project Valor was now active, and all human forces should prepare for extended operations. Jake had never heard of Project Valor, but he understood that someone had been planning for this possibility. On Earth, the alien demonstration of power had the opposite effect from what Zethkar had intended. Instead of frightening humanity into submission, the satellite shutdown had made people angry. Communication networks began rebuilding themselves almost immediately, using older technologies. Ham radio operators emerged from basements and garages to create new networks. Military forces switched to landline communications and messenger systems. Dr. Lisa Carter found herself appointed as humanity's chief xenobiologist, despite having never actually studied aliens before today. She worked frantically to understand anything she could about the visitors, while governments around the world tried to coordinate their response. Lisa had studied every form of life on Earth, and she knew that when any species was threatened with extinction, they fought back with everything they had. Zethkar grew increasingly frustrated as hours passed without the expected surrender. The alien ambassador sent reports to the Council fleet explaining that this species appeared to have some kind of defect that prevented them from recognizing superior force. The Council had dealt with stubborn races before, but never one that seemed to grow more defiant when threatened. Underground networks that had been dormant since the Cold War suddenly came alive. Military bunkers connected with each other using systems that predated computer networks. Scientists shared information through channels that had been designed to survive global catastrophe. Humanity began to coordinate its response using technology that was decades old but completely immune to alien interference. Tony Martinez worked around the clock in Amy's facility, upgrading the experimental spacecraft. The ships were small and fast and incorporated stealth technology that the aliens had never encountered because no other species had been paranoid enough to develop it. Humanity's history of warfare against itself had prepared them for conflicts that more peaceful species could not imagine. Kate Williams ran simulation after simulation in the prototype fighters, learning their capabilities and limitations. The EAS ships felt strange compared to human aircraft, but they were designed for combat in 3 dimensions rather than the atmospheric flight that had limited human warfare for centuries. Kate had been a test pilot for experimental aircraft, and she adapted quickly to the new requirements. President Walsh spoke to world leaders through secure channels that had been established during previous crises. The message was simple and direct. Earth would coordinate its resistance through existing military alliances, but every nation would contribute whatever resources they could spare. This was not a time for politics or territorial disputes. Zethkar finally lost patience with human stubbornness and ordered limited strikes against military installations to demonstrate the futility of resistance. Council ships targeted bases in remote areas where civilian casualties would be minimal. The aliens still hoped to avoid destroying a potentially useful species entirely. The strikes hit exactly as intended, destroying radar installations and military airfields with surgical precision. But instead of breaking human morale, the attacks had the opposite effect. Every explosion was broadcast around the world, showing that the aliens were not interested in peaceful coexistence, but in conquest and domination. Amy Brooks watched the attacks through her surveillance network and smiled grimly. The aliens had just made their biggest mistake. They had shown humanity that they were enemies rather than potential allies. Now there would be no possibility of compromise or negotiation. The war had officially begun. Jake Morrison received new orders to prepare Luna Base for extended siege operations. His small crew began converting their research facility into a military outpost, using supplies that had been stockpiled for emergencies. The moon would serve as humanity's first line of defense and their last refuge if Earth fell. Around the world, military forces went underground using tunnel systems and bunkers that had been prepared for nuclear war. The alien ships could destroy surface installations, but they could not reach the hidden networks where humanity was preparing its counterattack. Colonel Brooks activated sleeper cells that had been waiting for decades for a threat that most people had thought would never come. Zethkar reported to the Council that this species was unlike any they had encountered before. Instead of becoming more cooperative when threatened, they seemed to become more dangerous. For the first time in his long career as a Council ambassador, Zethkar began to wonder if they had underestimated their new subjects. Ryan Tucker strapped himself into the cockpit of humanity's first operational starfighter in a hidden launch bay beneath the Nevada desert. The ship was smaller than a traditional fighter jet, but packed with alien technology that Amy Brooks and her team had spent years perfecting. Ryan had volunteered for the most dangerous mission in human history, knowing that he probably would not survive, but also knowing that someone had to take the first shot in humanity's war for survival. The launch sequence was unlike anything Ryan had experienced in 20 years of military flying. Instead of rolling down a runway, the fighter was catapulted upward through a vertical shaft that emerged from what appeared to be an abandoned mine. Within seconds, Ryan found himself in space, with Earth falling away beneath him and the alien fleet spread out above like a constellation of death. Colonel Amy Brooks monitored the launch from her command center 200 feet underground. Her screen showed the positions of Council ships throughout the solar system and the planned attack routes for humanity's first strike. They had only 12 operational fighters, but each one carried weapons that combined human ingenuity with alien technology in ways the Council had never seen before. Pete Johnson emerged from the subway tunnels beneath New York City with a team of former Special Forces soldiers who had been recruited for the most classified mission in military history. Their target was the Council communication array that had been detected in Central Park directly beneath the largest alien ship. Intelligence suggested that destroying this array would disrupt coordination between Council forces throughout the system. Maya Rodriguez sat in a basement in Chicago, surrounded by computer equipment that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and alien components. Her job was to infiltrate Council data networks using techniques that no other species had developed because no other species had spent centuries trying to hack into each other's systems. Maya had been the best cybersecurity expert in the world before the invasion, and now she was humanity's best hope for understanding alien technology. Carla Stone checked her equipment one final time in the cargo bay of a civilian transport ship that was approaching the Council supply depot near Mars. Her explosives were hidden among medical supplies and food shipments that the aliens had requested from Earth as part of their tribute demands. The Council had no reason to suspect that humans would be clever enough to turn their own demands into weapons. Dr. Alan Foster worked frantically in his laboratory trying to develop countermeasures against Council weapon systems. His team had analyzed the energy signatures from the alien attacks and found patterns that suggested vulnerabilities in their targeting systems. Alan had been studying theoretical physics for 30 years, but had never imagined he would be designing weapons to fight aliens. Ryan Tucker's fighter approached the first Council patrol ship using stealth systems that made it nearly invisible to alien sensors. The ship was massive compared to his fighter, but Ryan had learned from studying the alien attacks that their vessels were designed for overwhelming firepower rather than maneuverability. He armed his weapons and prepared to test whether human tactics could overcome alien technology. The attack began simultaneously across the solar system. Ryan fired his missiles at the patrol ship while 11 other fighters engaged targets throughout. The asteroid belt. The weapons were small compared to Council armaments, but they had been designed to exploit weaknesses that Amy's team had discovered in alien shielding systems. The Council patrol ship exploded in a brilliant flash that could be seen from Earth with a telescope. Ryan's fighter suffered damage from the explosion but remained operational. He immediately changed course and headed for his secondary target, while Council ships throughout the system began responding to the unexpected attack. Pete Johnson's team reached the communication array in Central Park and began placing charges, while Council security forces searched for the attackers. The aliens had not expected ground resistance, and their security protocols were designed for threats from space rather than insurgents operating beneath their ships. Pete's team used tunnels and sewers to move unseen through the city. Maya Rodriguez successfully penetrated the outer layers of the Council data network and began downloading information about their fleet positions and operational procedures. The alien computer systems were more advanced than anything humans had developed, but they had been designed by species that did not understand the concept of malicious hacking. Maya found security gaps that would have been obvious to any human programmer. Carla Stone's transport ship docked with the Council supply depot and began unloading cargo while she prepared her explosives. The aliens were so confident in their superiority that they had minimal security on their logistics operations. Carla had been a demolitions expert in the military and knew exactly how much explosive would be needed to destroy the depot without damaging her own ship. The communication array in Central Park exploded in a shower of sparks and alien metal that rained down on the park. Council forces immediately began searching for the attackers, but Pete Johnson's team had already escaped through the subway system. The explosion disrupted communications between Council ships for several critical minutes. Ryan Tucker engaged his second target and discovered that the Council ships were adapting to human tactics faster than expected. His stealth systems were less effective now that the aliens knew to look for small, fast targets. Ryan switched to evasive maneuvers and found that his fighter's agility gave him advantages that the larger Council ships could not match. The supply depot near Mars exploded with enough force to be detected by telescopes on Earth. Carla Stone escaped in her transport ship while Council forces tried to understand how their secure facility had been compromised. The loss of supplies would force the Council to divert ships from Earth to protect their remaining logistics networks. Maya Rodriguez transmitted her stolen data to resistance cells around the world before the Council could trace her intrusion. The information included fleet positions, attack patterns, and most importantly, the location of Council command ships that were coordinating the entire invasion. Maya shut down her equipment and prepared to move to a new location before alien security forces could find her. Dr. Alan Foster completed his analysis of Council weapons and transmitted his findings to every resistance cell on Earth. The alien energy weapons had a recharge cycle that created brief windows of vulnerability. Human forces could exploit these gaps if they coordinated their attacks precisely. Alan began working on weapons that could take advantage of this weakness. Amy Brooks watched the battle reports from her underground command center and realized that humanity had achieved something unprecedented. For the first time in Galactic history, a species had successfully struck back against a Council invasion fleet. The attacks had been small, but they proved that alien technology was not invincible. Zethkar received reports of the attacks with growing alarm. The humans had somehow developed space combat capabilities in the few hours since the invasion began. Their tactics were unlike anything in Council military doctrine, and their willingness to sacrifice themselves in desperate attacks was completely irrational by Council standards. Ryan Tucker's fighter suffered critical damage during his third engagement, but he managed to destroy another Council ship before losing power. He ejected from his fighter and activated an emergency beacon, hoping that human forces would recover him before the aliens could capture him. Ryan had accomplished his mission and proven that humans could fight in space. The Council fleet began implementing new security procedures in response to the human attacks, but they were reacting to threats they had never encountered before. Their military doctrine was based on overwhelming technological superiority rather than asymmetric warfare. They had no experience fighting opponents who used guerrilla tactics and suicide attacks. Pete Johnson established new resistance cells throughout New York City, using the chaos caused by the communication array explosion as cover. Former police, officers, military veterans, and ordinary citizens volunteered to fight against the occupation. The alien demonstration of power had transformed fear into anger, and anger into determination to resist. Captain Jake Morrison led a strike team of lunar miners and scientists toward the disabled Council ship that had been drifting in Earth's orbit for 3 days since Ryan Tucker's attack. The alien vessel had suffered critical damage to its power systems, but remained largely intact. Jake knew that capturing an enemy ship would give humanity access to technology they desperately needed to level the playing field. The approach to the Council ship required careful timing to avoid detection by the rest of the alien fleet. Jake's team used a civilian cargo hauler that had been modified with basic stealth systems and armed with improvised weapons. They had one chance to board the ship before Council forces realized what was happening and destroyed it to prevent capture. Dr. Nancy Clark waited in her laboratory at the Los Alamos facility, studying energy readings from the alien attacks. She had discovered patterns in the Council weapons that suggested their technology was based on principles that human physics could understand and potentially duplicate. Nancy had been working on theoretical energy systems for 20 years, and now had the chance to test her theories against real alien hardware. Brad Thompson supervised the conversion of automobile factories into spacecraft production facilities. across the American Midwest. The assembly lines that had once built cars now produced components for fighters and missiles using designs that combined human manufacturing techniques with alien technology. Brad had managed production systems his entire career, but had never imagined building spaceships on an industrial scale. Maya Rodriguez established her new command center in an abandoned shopping mall in Detroit, where she had access to multiple fiber optic networks and backup power systems. Her penetration of Council data networks had revealed the location of their primary command ship, hidden in the asteroid belt beyond Mars. Maya worked with a team of hackers and programmers to plan a cyber attack that would disable the ship's defensive systems. The boarding action on the Council ship proved more dangerous than Jake Morrison had expected. The alien vessel was partially automated and continued to defend itself, even without a crew. Jake's team fought through corridors filled with defensive systems that fired energy beams and released toxic gases. 3 team members were lost before they reached the ship's central computer core. Carla Stone led a demolition team through the sewers beneath Los Angeles, targeting Council supply caches that had been detected by resistant surveillance. The aliens had established supply dumps throughout major cities to support their occupation forces, but had not expected human insurgents to map their locations and plan coordinated attacks. Carla's team carried explosives made from household chemicals and alien power cells. Lucas Hayes commanded a unit of Marines that had been assigned to capture alien prisoners for interrogation. Intelligence had identified Council patrol routes where single ships could be isolated and disabled without alerting the main fleet. Lucas had fought in 3 wars but had never attempted to capture enemies that were technologically superior and potentially hostile to human biology. Dana Wright worked with a team of linguists and computer specialists trying to decode alien communication protocols intercepted by Maya's hacking operations. The Council used complex encryption systems, but they were based on mathematical principles that human cryptographers could eventually crack. Dana had broken enemy codes during previous conflicts and applied the same techniques to alien transmissions. Jake Morrison's team successfully accessed the Council ship's computer core and began downloading data while Brad Thompson's technicians analyzed the ship's propulsion and weapons systems. The alien technology was more advanced than human engineering, but followed logical principles that could be understood and copied. Jake realized that the Council's greatest advantage was their manufacturing capacity rather than superior physics. Dr. Nancy Clark received the technical data from the captured ship and immediately began designing human weapons that could penetrate Council defensive systems. The alien shields were powerful, but operated on specific frequencies that could be disrupted by properly tuned energy weapons. Nancy calculated that human factories could produce such weapons within weeks if they had access to the necessary materials. The cyber attack on the Council command ship began when Maya Rodriguez and her team simultaneously accessed multiple alien networks using codes stolen from the captured vessel. The attack was designed to appear like a system malfunction rather than hostile intrusion. Council technicians would waste valuable time diagnosing phantom problems while human forces prepared their next offensive. Carla Stone's explosions across Los Angeles destroyed 17 Council supply caches and damaged the alien logistics network, supporting their West Coast operations. The simultaneous attacks forced Council forces to divert ships from other missions to protect their remaining supplies. Carla's team escaped through storm drains and subway tunnels while alien security forces searched the wrong areas. Lucas Hayes successfully captured 3 Council prisoners during a raid on an isolated patrol ship near the moon. The aliens proved to be surprisingly fragile compared to humans and required special life support systems to survive in Earth's environment. Lucas delivered the prisoners to interrogation specialists who had been studying alien biology from recovered remains. The interrogation of Council prisoners revealed critical weaknesses in alien military doctrine. The prisoners were shocked that humans had been able to mount any resistance at all and provided information about Council fleet positions and attack plans in exchange for basic medical treatment. They had never encountered a species that fought. Back after being offered surrender terms, Dana Wright's team decoded alien communications and discovered that the Council was facing pressure from other galactic powers who were concerned about their inability to pacify a single primitive world. Several member species were questioning the Council's military leadership, and some were considering withdrawing their support for the invasion. Brad Thompson's factories began producing the first generation of human starfighters based on technology stolen from the captured Council ship. The new fighters were larger and better armed than the prototypes used in the initial attacks. Production increased rapidly as more facilities were converted and additional alien components were recovered from destroyed ships. Dr. Nancy Clark completed her design for human energy weapons and began testing prototypes against recovered alien armor and shielding. The weapons were effective, but required rare materials that could only be obtained by capturing more Council ships. Nancy calculated that humanity needed to capture at least 50 alien vessels to build a fleet capable of challenging the invasion force. Maya Rodriguez discovered that the Council command ship's computers contained detailed information about other species that had been conquered by the Galactic Empire. Several of these species had been forced to provide military support for the invasion of Earth. Maya realized that humanity could potentially turn these unwilling allies against their Council masters. Jake Morrison led his second boarding mission against a Council heavy cruiser that had been damaged during an attack on the lunar mining facilities. The ship was larger and more heavily defended than their previous target, but contained advanced manufacturing equipment that could accelerate human starship production by months or years. The battle for the Council cruiser lasted 6 hours and cost Jake Morrison half of his assault team. The aliens had learned from the previous boarding action and implemented new security measures. However, human adaptability and willingness to accept casualties eventually overwhelmed the ship's automated defenses. Carla Stone expanded her operations to include attacks on Council communication networks in major cities around the world. Her teams used improvised electromagnetic pulse weapons to disable alien electronics while conventional explosives destroyed backup systems. The attacks forced the Council to rely on heavily encrypted transmissions that were easier for human cryptographers to intercept and decode. The captured Council cruiser contained manufacturing equipment capable of producing alien technology components at an industrial scale. Brad Thompson's engineers worked around the clock to understand and modify the equipment for human use. Within days, they were producing energy weapon shields and propulsion systems that could equip hundreds of human starfighters. Council forces began adapting to human tactics by implementing more aggressive security measures and launching preemptive strikes against suspected resistance positions. However, their efforts were hampered by incomplete intelligence about human capabilities and organizational structure. The Council had never fought an opponent that operated through decentralized resistance networks rather than traditional military hierarchies. Admiral Grace Parker stood on the bridge of the human flagship Defiance as the newly constructed Earth fleet prepared for its first major offensive against Council forces. 6 months of desperate fighting had transformed humanity from a species facing extinction into a military power capable of challenging galactic empires. Grace had commanded naval vessels for 20 years, but had never imagined leading humanity's first interstellar fleet into battle. The Defiance was built using technology captured from 17 Council ships and incorporated design improvements that human engineers had developed through trial and error in dozens of smaller engagements. The ship was smaller than Council heavy cruisers, but faster and more maneuverable with weapon systems that could penetrate alien defensive shields. General Sam Rogers coordinated the defense of Earth from a command center buried beneath the Rocky Mountains. The planet's surface was now covered with automated defense platforms that used alien technology to create a protective umbrella against Council bombardment. Sam had spent his career preparing for conventional warfare, but had adapted quickly to the requirements of planetary defense against space-based threats. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the assault squadron assigned to capture the Council logistics base in the asteroid belt. His ships were crewed by volunteers who had trained on captured alien equipment and learned to fight in three-dimensional space battles that had no equivalent in human military experience. Jake's squadron included former pilots, miners, and engineers who had become some of the most effective combat veterans in human history. Pilot Sarah Davis led the fighter escort protecting the human fleet as it moved beyond Earth's defensive perimeter for the first time since the invasion began. Her squadron had been equipped with the latest generation of human starfighters built in factories that now operated around the clock producing ships and weapons. Sarah had lost friends in every major battle, but had also seen humanity grow stronger with each engagement. The first target of the human offensive was the Council supply depot that supported their operations throughout the inner solar system. Intelligence gathered by Maya Rodriguez indicated that destroying this facility would force the aliens to withdraw several battle groups to protect their remaining logistics networks. The attack would also capture enough materials to build additional human ships. Sergeant Nick Taylor led a ground assault team trained to fight in zero-gravity environments using captured alien equipment and human ingenuity. His soldiers wore modified spacesuits armed with energy weapons and carried explosives designed to work in vacuum conditions. Nick had fought in urban warfare on Earth, but had learned to adapt his tactics to the unique requirements of space combat. The human fleet approached the asteroid belt using stealth technology that had been improved through analysis of captured Council sensor systems. Admiral Parker divided her forces into 3 groups that would attack the supply depot from different directions, while a 4th group created a diversion near Jupiter to draw Council reinforcements away from the target. Dr. Nancy Clark monitored the performance of human weapon systems from her position aboard the Defiance. Her energy weapons had proven effective against Council shields, but required constant adjustment as the aliens adapted their defensive systems. Nancy worked with a team of physicists and engineers to modify human weapons in real time during the battle. Maya Rodriguez had established a mobile command center aboard one of the assault ships, where she continued her cyber warfare operations against Council computer networks. Her team had developed viruses specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in alien software systems. Maya's attacks would disable enemy communications and targeting systems at critical moments during the battle. The attack began when Sarah Davis led her fighters against Council patrol ships guarding the outer perimeter of the asteroid belt. The human fighters used swarm tactics that overwhelmed alien point defense systems through sheer numbers and unpredictable movement patterns. Sarah's squadron destroyed 6 Council ships before the main alien force could respond. Admiral Parker ordered the main fleet to engage the Council battle group protecting the supply depot, while Jake Morrison's assault squadron moved to capture the facility itself. The battle was fought among the asteroids, where human ships could use the rocky terrain for cover, while Council vessels struggled with maneuverability in the confined space. Nick Taylor's assault team boarded the supply depot using breaching pods that had been developed specifically for attacking alien installations. The facility was defended by automated systems and a small crew of Council technicians who had never experienced direct combat. Nick's soldiers secured the depot within 2 hours and began loading captured materials onto human transport ships. The Council response was swift and overwhelming. Additional battle groups arrived from Mars and the outer planets, forcing Admiral Parker to withdraw before her fleet could be surrounded. However, the raid had been successful in capturing enough alien technology to equip dozens of additional human ships while proving that Council forces could be defeated in direct combat. General Rogers launched simultaneous attacks on Council installations throughout the solar system, while the main fleet engaged enemy forces in the asteroid belt. Earth's defensive platforms targeted alien ships in lunar orbit, while resistance forces on the planet struck Council communication centers and supply caches. The coordinated offensive put enormous pressure on alien forces that had been designed for occupation rather than prolonged warfare. The psychological impact of the human offensive was as important as the military results. Council member species began questioning their leadership's ability to pacify a primitive world that had somehow developed space combat capabilities within months of first contact. Several species sent diplomatic missions to neutral systems expressing concerns about the ongoing conflict. Captain Morrison led a follow-up raid against a council mining operation in the outer asteroid belt that was producing materials for alien ship construction. His squadron destroyed the facility and captured its entire output of rare metals that were essential for building advanced propulsion systems. The raid demonstrated that human forces could now operate throughout the solar system. Sarah Davis received promotion to squadron leader after her fighters destroyed 12 council ships during the asteroid belt offensive. Her pilots had developed new tactics that exploited the superior maneuverability of human starfighters against larger alien vessels. Sarah began training additional pilots using combat experience gained during actual battles rather than theoretical simulations. Dr. Nancy Clark completed development of a new generation of human energy weapons that could penetrate any known Council defensive system. The weapons required significant amounts of power, but could be mounted on larger human ships that were now being constructed using captured alien manufacturing equipment. Nancy calculated that these weapons would give humanity a decisive advantage in future engagements. Maya Rodriguez successfully infiltrated the Council Fleet's Central Command Network and discovered plans for a massive counteroffensive designed to retake control of the inner solar system. The alien battle plan relied on overwhelming force rather than tactical innovation and could be defeated if human forces were properly positioned to exploit its weaknesses. The success of the human offensive forced the Council to reassess their strategy for dealing with Earth. Several member species withdrew their military support, claiming that the conflict had become too costly and unpredictable. The Council found itself fighting a war against an opponent that grew stronger with each engagement, while their own forces became increasingly demoralized. Admiral Parker received intelligence about Council fleet movements from resistance networks that had been established on several alien worlds by species that had been conquered in previous invasions. These unwilling subjects of the Galactic Empire provided information about Council military capabilities and political weaknesses that could be exploited in future operations. The human fleet returned to Earth with enough captured materials to double the size of their space forces within 3 months. The successful offensive had proven that humanity could not only defend their homeworld, but could also project military power throughout the solar system. The Council had created an enemy that was now capable of threatening their entire galactic empire. General Rogers began planning for the next phase of human expansion beyond the solar system. Intelligence indicated that several Council member species were considering rebellion against their imperial masters. Rogers calculated that supporting these rebellions would stretch Council forces too thin to maintain their occupation of Earth, while creating opportunities for human forces to establish bases in other star systems. The final battle for galactic freedom began when the human fleet emerged from hyperspace above the Virex homeworld, where the Council's most ancient and powerful warships waited in formation around their capital planet. Admiral Grace Parker commanded. Over 300 human vessels, built with captured alien technology and crewed by volunteers who had learned to fight among the stars. The fleet represented humanity's complete transformation from a single world species to a galactic military power in less than 2 years. Commander Lisa Barnes led the assault on the orbital defense platforms that protected the Virex capital, while her husband, Captain Rick Barnes, coordinated the space battle from his position aboard the heavy cruiser Vengeance. The couple had developed tactical coordination methods that allowed human forces to operate with precision that surprised their alien opponents. Their combined approach had proven devastatingly effective during the campaign that brought humanity to the heart of Council territory. The Vrex had ruled the Galactic Empire for over 1,000 years and had never experienced an attack on their homeworld. Their defensive systems were designed to repel invasion fleets from other Council member species rather than the asymmetric warfare tactics that humanity had perfected. The ancient aliens found themselves facing an enemy that fought unlike anything in their military experience. President Henry Walsh transmitted humanity's final ultimatum to the Council leadership from the command ship that had brought him to the battle. Earth demanded the complete dissolution of the Galactic Empire and the establishment of a new confederation based on equality and mutual cooperation rather than conquest and domination. The message was broadcast simultaneously to every world. In Council territory, including those whose populations had been enslaved for generations, Captain Jake Morrison commanded the strike force assigned to penetrate the Council's Supreme Command Center buried deep beneath the VREX capital city. His assault teams included veterans from every major battle of the war and were equipped with the most advanced weapons and armor that human engineers had developed. Jake knew that capturing the command center would end the war, but the facility was protected by defenses that had never been tested in actual combat. The space battle above the VREX homeworld involved over 1,000 ships from both sides and represented the largest military engagement in galactic history. Human vessels used swarm tactics and unpredictable movement patterns, while Council forces relied on formation fighting and overwhelming firepower. The conflict stretched across multiple orbital zones and involved tactics that had been developed during 2 years of continuous warfare. Sarah Davis led the fighter squadrons that cleared landing zones for Jake Morrison's assault force, while simultaneously engaging Council interceptors trying to prevent the human landing. Her pilots had become the most experienced space combat veterans in the galaxy and flew ships that incorporated the best features of human and alien technology. Sarah's fighters moved through the battle like deadly dancers, avoiding enemy fire while delivering precise strikes against critical targets. Dr. Nancy Clark monitored the performance of humanity's most advanced weapon systems from her position aboard Admiral Parker's flagship. The energy weapons she had designed were now capable of penetrating any known defensive system and had given human forces the firepower advantage needed to challenge Council battle fleets. Nancy continued to modify the weapons in real time as Council forces adapted their defensive strategies. Maya Rodriguez coordinated cyber warfare operations that disrupted Council communications and targeting systems throughout their fleet. Her team had developed computer viruses specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in the most advanced alien software and had successfully penetrated every major Council network. Maya's attacks prevented effective coordination between Council forces and created opportunities for human tactical advantages. The assault on the Supreme Command Center required Jake Morrison's teams to fight through defensive systems that had been designed by 12 different alien species over centuries of technological development. The facility was protected by energy barriers, automated weapons, and environmental hazards that would have stopped any conventional attack. However, human ingenuity and willingness to accept casualties eventually overcame every obstacle. Commander Barnes led her assault on the orbital platforms using boarding tactics that had been perfected during dozens of smaller engagements throughout the war. Her Marines fought through corridors filled with defensive systems, while engineers worked to capture the platforms intact rather than simply destroying them. The captured platforms would become the foundation for humanity's own orbital defense networks. The psychological impact of the attack on the VREX homeworld was felt throughout Council territory as member species realized that their imperial masters were not invincible. Rebellions broke out on 17 worlds, while several species formally withdrew their support for the Galactic Empire. The Council found itself fighting multiple wars simultaneously while their most powerful forces were engaged against humanity. Captain Barnes coordinated the space battle using tactical innovations that human forces had developed through constant adaptation during 2 years of warfare. Council formations that had been successful for centuries proved vulnerable to human tactics that emphasized speed, flexibility, and unpredictable attack patterns. Rick's coordination allowed smaller human forces to defeat larger Council fleets through superior tactics and crew training. The breakthrough came when Jake Morrison's assault teams captured the central control room of the Supreme Command Center and gained access to the master computers that coordinated Council military operations throughout the galaxy. Maya Rodriguez immediately began downloading critical intelligence while Jake's teams secured the facility against counterattack. The intelligence captured from the command center revealed the true extent of Council weakness and the growing rebellion among their subject species. Over 40 worlds were in various stages of revolt, while the Empire's military forces were stretched thin trying to maintain control. The Council had become dependent on fear and overwhelming technological superiority rather than building genuine alliances with member species. Admiral Parker received surrender offers from 17 Council member species during the battle as their representatives realized that continued resistance was futile. The species offered to provide intelligence about remaining Council forces in exchange for guarantees that they would be treated fairly under any new galactic government. Grace accepted the surrenders and immediately began coordinating with former enemies to locate remaining Council strongholds. President Walsh addressed the galaxy from the captured command center, announcing the end of the Council Empire and the beginning of a new era based on cooperation rather than conquest. The broadcast reached every inhabited world and was translated into over 2,000 languages by computer systems that had been designed to maintain Imperial communications. Henry's message offered membership in a new galactic confederation to any species willing to abandon conquest and embrace peaceful cooperation. The remaining Council forces attempted a final desperate attack against human positions, but found themselves abandoned by most of their former allies. The attack failed when the Vrex leadership formally surrendered rather than see their homeworld destroyed in a futile last stand. The surrender of the Empire's founding species effectively ended organized resistance throughout Council territory. Commander Barnes led the occupation forces that secured the Virex capital and began the process of dismantling the Imperial government. Her teams worked with representatives from former subject species to establish temporary administrations that would maintain order while new governmental structures were developed. Lisa's diplomatic skills proved as valuable as her military experience during the transition period. The war that had begun with Council threats and human defiance ended with the transformation of galactic civilization. Humanity had not sought to replace the Council Empire with their own imperial system, but instead created a confederation where all species could participate as equals. The galaxy would be rebuilt based on cooperation and mutual benefit rather than conquest and domination. The final irony was that the Council's attempt to intimidate humanity through superior force had created the very enemy that would destroy their empire. Fear had been their most effective weapon for over a millennium, but when applied to humans it had produced fury instead of submission. That fury had grown into a military force capable of reshaping galactic civilization and creating a new order based on freedom rather than fear. Maya Rodriguez established new communication networks that connected former Council worlds with Earth and allowed, for the first time in galactic history, free exchange of information and ideas between species. The networks would become the foundation for cultural and scientific cooperation that would benefit all members of the new confederation. President Walsh concluded his address to the galaxy by explaining that humanity had not fought for conquest, but for the right of all species to determine their own destiny. The new Galactic Confederation would be built on the principle that no species had the right to dominate others regardless of their technological or military advantages.